So last week, I suggested that the current climate and ecological emergency has a spiritual dimension. We can see it as a crisis of empathy. By empathy, I mean our ethical imagination, our ability to imagine the impact of our actions, for instance, on the inhabitants of low-lying Pacific islands. Last week, we also explored the parable of the burning house from the White Lotus Sutra, one of the most famous texts of the Buddhism. In the parable, the father tries to work out how to get his children out of a burning house, as you remember if you were here last week. He yells at them that the house is on fire, and they take no notice. They carry on playing with their toys. In other words, telling people to save themselves or even save each other doesn't seem to have much appeal, only seems to have limited appeal. Then the father has a moment of inspiration. He tells his children that there are even better toys outside than the ones they're playing with inside the house, even better toys outside. Then they come rushing out of the house as fast as they can go, jostling each other, trying to get out of the house to see these first out, to see these new toys. And the question I asked, based on this parable, this story from the Buddhist text, is what could be our equivalent cry of inspiration in relation to the climate and ecological emergency? How do we get people out of a burning house when they don't even seem to notice that it's on fire? We need a compelling vision of what life could be like outside the burning house if we want people to get out of it. And I really enjoyed the creativity that we came up with here about what that would look like, what that could look like in terms of a vision of life outside the burning house. People's responses and their vision of how life could be. Last week also, we looked at Indra's net. So Indra's net is an image from the Buddhist text. It's an image of a beautiful, almost infinite net with jewels that each tied into the knots of the net. And this net is an ecological restatement of the Buddhist teaching on how things arise independent upon conditions. We considered the beauty of this image, how the jewels reflect each other and are reflected in each other, and how each jewel tied into the net reflects all the other jewels, so that the process of reflection itself is infinite. We saw that this image applies directly to our current climate and ecological emergency. If any of the jewels become cloudy, they reflect the other jewels less clearly. If any ecological niche in our environment becomes toxic or polluted, it affects all the other niches. Likewise, if rivers are cleaned and wetlands restored, life across the environment is enhanced. So that was last week, for those who weren't here, and just a brief summary for those who were, just to kind of catch us up. So this week, we're going to look at fire alarm psychology, touching the earth, the bases of Buddhist environmental ethics, how or why I wrote this book, and working with overwhelm, fear, despair, depression, and anxiety in that order. And next week, we will be looking at climate comedy. Yes, there is such a thing. Anger, grief, gratitude, non-violent social change, and possibly, if we have time, an evocation of the Pure Land. So that's what we'll be doing next week. Join us next week. First of all, fire alarm psychology. Fire alarm psychology. Now you may wonder what this is about, but basically, if you're in a burning house and the fire alarm goes off, what do you do? What happens when the fire alarm goes off? People tend to sit around and look nervously to see if anybody is taking it seriously. Have you actually been in this kind of situation in a building where it has actually happened to you? Well, I remember the fire alarm used to go off at school every once in a while. You know that fire alarm. Yeah. So it's time to break the spell. If we take it seriously and run out of the house, other people are likely to do the same. That's fire alarms. Why is it so difficult for us to hear the alarm, especially when we're aware that we're headed for destruction, in the sense of rising sea levels, melting ice caps, changing weather patterns, and all the things that are going to follow from that. Acidification of the sea, flooding of low-lying areas, heat waves, extreme weather, and so on. One reason could be that we're creatures of habit and comfort. I know from my own experience that I get into a certain activity, a certain habit, a certain way of life even, and if I'm not careful, at some point I lose awareness. I lose a sense of choice about what I'm doing. It's easier to continue doing what I'm doing than stop. In fact, stopping would mean having to acknowledge discomfort and dissatisfaction, including how I feel about the likely consequences of my actions and our collective actions. It's just easier to keep going. And that is what I think is happening. I think that's what's happening. We're just keeping going because it's going to be hard to stop and look at what's happening. It's going to bring up quite a lot of painful things. If we want to address the climate and ecological emergency, we're going to need a collective change of heart. This requires a social fabric and community that helps people experience a change of heart. It begins when we recognize each other's needs as valuable. As in COVID-19 times, as we're coming out of, it may include re-evaluating such activities as care and teaching and so forth. More broadly, we can recognize and accept the validity of the needs of other species and acknowledge the claims of future generations for clean air, clean water, and the habitable earth. Now that all to me sounds like just complete common sense. However, we're not there yet by a long way. So here's my question. So breakout rooms coming up, Yasmin, in twos, please. And we're going to twos here as well, in the actual room, in the in-person room. So my question is, if you're in a burning house and you notice it's burning and other people don't, how do you deliver that message? How do you get that message? How do you tell people that the house is on fire? And how loud are you going to go? Okay? So that's my question. In pairs, how loud are you going to go with the message? This house is on fire. Okay? How loud are you going to go? So in pairs, please. We have 4 minutes in total. I suggest 2 minutes each way, but we have 4 minutes in total for this inquiry.
Wow.
So,
Hello.
Okay, no, we didn't. Okay, but let's just make it start. So, how loud are you going to go? So, they'll be joining us in a few seconds, so we'll just make it start. How loud are you going to go?
Well,
Sorry.
yeah. For me, I don't think it's necessarily just about how loud.
Okay.
I was thinking, because I think you're quite right in when you described, like when I work in an office, we've had a situation where an alarm goes off. It was a great big, we were on the 5th floor, I think, but it's 13th floor building, big tower block. And the alarm goes off, fire alarm goes off, and we just sit there looking at each other.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a fire? Do you think we should? Do you think we should do something? And but a person with authority, like the fire warden, because they're responsible, they get on their jacket. So they've got their jacket on, and then it's everybody out, everybody, and we just, oh right, okay, off we go. So I think it's a bit about having authority.
Yeah.
If you can do it with authority, yes, you need to shout pretty loud as well, but having the authority or apparent authority, people will go, okay, yeah.
Kind of highlights our leaders in the country. If they're shouting loud, or people in the world that have power are shouting loud, that might have a real
Yeah,
good effect.
leadership, yeah.
It's a micro
person.
version
Yeah,
of that.
okay. So people online, can you write in the chat how loud would you go? And not the essay version. It's just like 2 sentences, and then I'll be able to read it out. That's okay. So people online, if you want to join in, and I'm going to take another one from in person. So somebody else, how loud did you go?
I was just thinking, for me, it's quite obvious the whole kind of pandemic. Once governments started taking it seriously, how quickly we changed, how quickly we changed behaviours. I mean, it was like almost overnight. You know, we stopped driving around, we stopped going to work, blah blah blah. All that, and it shows that we can change just like that. If the people, you know, who are leaders, government, whatever, they say, look, we need to do this. Most people just do it. And you know, it'd be nice if they took the climate crisis as seriously.
Yeah.
The thing it takes for a lot of people, it takes something like, you know, the guy in the yellow jacket to come in and say, look, you need to do this now, and then we'll do it.
Okay. Yeah. So COVID gives us an example where public health was prioritised over profit, over the economy, massively, in a way that you just could not imagine before that. Yeah. So that is an example of how public policy can change if there's a sense that there's a will, there's political will there, some social will there to make change. Yeah.
But in Taranisha's example, you know, the fire alarm goes off, and then the guy with the yellow jacket responds to that. Yeah. So maybe we're the fire alarm. We've got to shout to get the yellow jacket guy to, you know, to go up the chain and to bring the yellow jacket guy out.
People in authority, where are they?
Well,
Come
yeah.
here and tell us to get out of the house.
Well, but you know, and we do have some connection to that authority.
Sure. We have our own. I'd like to read out something from the chat. Sophie says, dialogue, talking collectively in communities to decision makers, no need to shout. Shadaloshni says, still feel I'm recovering from the pandemic and out of sync with the wider world issues and concentrating locally. Okay. Tim says, I'm involved in lobbying and pressurizing local and sometimes national governments about my priorities. Specifications I want them to take seriously. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
We noticed in our conversation, maybe it needs some drama, because it's like when an accident happened on the street, everyone stops and looks at it, or cars drive slower, and maybe it needs some action in a way like XR is doing to make this drama and persistent. I guess we came to this point. It needs continuity in doing it again and again and again. Okay. We think it's not one shout.
Right. So we're hearing disruption, you might consider disruption. I'm hearing some street theatre, and also persistence. Being persistent. It's not a one-time action. None of this is a one-time action. It's a process. Thank you. Sophie says creative disruption. sunrise.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So that's something about fire alarms and how we might respond to them. So I want to look now at touching the earth, and in particular, I'll start with the Buddha touching the earth. And you might remember this from your studies, that just before the Enlightenment, before the Buddhist Enlightenment, a figure called Mara came along and said to the Buddha, "What right have you got to sit on that seat and gain enlightenment?" And in response, the Buddha reached down and touched the earth, and he called the earth to witness his many years or many lifetimes of practice and acting, contributing to life in different ways. We know this as the earth touching mudra. So this is a gesture of groundedness. He calls the earth to witness, to witness his right to sit on the seat of enlightenment. It's a kind of, how can I say, it's a kind of embodied cognition. It means he touches something as a way of letting everybody know that he's in the right place, that he's on his way to enlightenment. It's a kind of knowing which involves touching the earth. And I think that's a very important reference. So what's our equivalent of Siddhartha's earth touching mudra? In other words, when do you feel closest to the earth? When do you feel closest to the earth? So maybe just take, rather than we go into pairs, just take a moment to reflect on that. And then online people, if you want to write in the chat, and yeah, so maybe just take 1 minute of silent reflection. We won't go into pairs. When do you feel closest to the earth, the most connected to the earth? So when do you feel most connected to the earth?
Walking barefoot in the woods.
Walking barefoot in the woods. Yeah. So you actually feel it. Soles in your feet. With all the senses.
We went on at Taraloka. It was muddy, and we walked through all the paths in the really scorchy mud.
Yeah.
And when we took our shoes off, we actually just walked through the centre of the paths very easily. And when we had people with shoes on and things, were sort of skirting around the edges. That was quite interesting.
It was actually easier.
It was easier to walk barefoot and just go through it all.
Right.
And then wash your feet. It was a sort of a psychological thing, you know, as well.
Thank you. Okay, Tim says, when I'm walking in the country, cultivating the community orchard, shout out to the Hallfield Organic Community Orchard, harvesting vegetables, hiking in the mountains, says Magdalena, mindful walking. Okay. Anybody else? Any other?
Yeah, I thought about walking in the woods as well. I particularly sort of ancient woodlands, not barefoot in my case, but yeah, just yeah, ancient woodlands.
Swimming into the sun. I went yesterday to the Henley's Lake, and it was very beautiful.
So swimming in Henley's Lake, swimming in the direction of the sun. Yeah, So we have these experiences of feeling very close, very, very close to the natural world, to the earth. Now, the Buddha lived in a time when there were vast tracts of virgin forest in India. There were towns, there was cultivated land, there was fields. However, there were still vast areas of untouched forest in India. And he had a particularly close connection to trees. He was born in a forest, he lived in a forest after going forth, and he gained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, which is a peepal tree. Afterwards, he spent 7 weeks sitting within sight of that tree, absorbing the profound impact of his experience. In the second week, the newly awakened Buddha looked back at the Bodhi tree, the tree that he gained enlightenment under, feeling deep gratitude for how the tree had sheltered him. This reminds us that gratitude is an enlightened quality, knowing that something has been done for our benefit. Veneration of the Bodhi tree continues to this day in Bodh Gaya. Recent archaeological research at Lumbini, which is the Buddha's birthplace, suggests that the shrine originally protected a tree. In the time of the Buddha, people believed that trees were inhabited by spirits, not just trees, but also hills, woods, and groves could also become shrines. This form of animism, the belief that nature is alive, is echoed in the myths of ancient Greece, Rome, and other cultures. The Buddhist tradition used Jataka stories or birth stories about trees to illustrate values of care, protection, and ecological awareness. So I'm just going to give you an example of three of these birth stories about the Buddha's former lives that involve trees. So in one story about the Buddha's former lives, he's a sal tree, a particular kind of tree called a sal tree in the Himalayas. And he exhorts the other trees in the forest to live in the safety of the forest. A great storm sweeps through the region, and the trees in the forest survive together, whereas the solitary trees sustain damage or destruction, showing that there's strength in unity. In other words, trees support each other. Trees provide support and protection for each other as humans. In another story, a beautiful wishing tree is going to be cut down to repair the main pillar of the king's house. So, the king's house, big house, supported by one central main pillar. And this tree, the wishing tree, is going to be cut down for its purpose. The king's carpenters bring sacrifices to the tree and let the tree know that they'll be back the following day to cut it down. So that does seem very considerate, but at the same time, they're still going to cut it down. So the tree bursts into tears, and all its friends gather around to find out what's the matter. None of them can think of a way to stop the carpenters. Finally, the future Buddha, who is living beside the wishing tree as a clump of grass, transforms into a chameleon and turns the wishing tree's bark blotchy. So it changes the color of the bark, so it's really blotchy. So it looks diseased, basically. So the wishing tree's trunk looks diseased. When the carpenters arrive, they declare that the tree is rotten and has holes. The wishing tree is saved. So this fable speaks to the value of ingenuity and creativity in preserving ecosystems. You need to be a little bit ingenious sometimes. Finally, third story, a lion and a tiger live in a forest. While they're there, humans dare not enter. They're terrified of the lion and the tiger. However, one of the tree spirits becomes disgusted with the stench of animal carcasses left by the lion and the tiger. So the tree spirit scares off the lion and the tiger. Once the humans realize that the lion and the tiger are no longer in the forest, they enter it, they clear it, and they cultivate the land, as was the habit in ancient India, just as it is nowadays say in the Amazon and elsewhere. The moral of the story is to look at the ecosystem as a whole before intervening to improve it. You need to look at the whole system before you try to tinker with it. Otherwise, you might end up doing things which have unintended consequences. In this case, the destruction of the whole forest. So these are three stories that illustrate a kind of ecological awareness in the early Buddhists. And these stories are connected with the life story. So what touched you? What comes up for you? What touched you hearing these three stories? And same online people, if you'd like to write in the chat, if there's something that touched you about these three stories.
When the tree wept
Yes.
and the other trees gathered round.
Um,
So I think it was the aspect of humanizing the tree makes it very relatable as to my life. Yeah, it's quite powerful.
Somebody else? What touched you in these stories?
I liked that the Buddha was a clump of grass at one point.
The Buddha was a clump of grass.
Hope for us all.
It was that sort of kind of, so easy to walk by something or not value it.
Yeah.
When you don't know who it is or what potential something has.
And he has the power to transform himself into a chameleon. That's pretty cool. Yeah. That's something you just walk past every day. Anybody else? Anybody comments? Saving the tree, Debbie says, saving the tree by changing its appearance. Sophie, there's a great video of the rewilding of the Yellowstone National Park when the wolves were reintroduced. It showed how powerful nature can be if left to run wild. So the wolves scared off the deer, and it's the deer that were eating the new shoots that preventing the regrowth of the trees, I think, to remember. So reintroducing wolves meant that actually the whole park was able to regenerate because the deer were less prevalent. So didn't spend so much time munching away at the new shoots.
And then it went even further. The deer used to drink by the rivers. And when the wolves were introduced, they didn't go to the open areas. So it rewilded all the river banks and the fish. And it had such far-reaching consequences that you wouldn't have a thought of.
So we need to consider the whole ecosystem if we're going to start tinkering. Well, we have been tinkering. However, we still need to reconsider the whole ecosystem about how to address that, how to redress, restore the harm that we've caused or we've occasioned. So the Buddha revered the whole of life, and there's loads of evidence for this. One little story, one little vignette is that the Buddha went to visit 3 of his disciples who were living in a wood. And they told him about their quite detailed instructions about how they took care of their local water sources. So if you're dependent on water sources, you need to take care of them. If you poison them by throwing food or carcasses or whatever into your water source, that will poison water source for you and for everybody else, all the other animals in the area. So they were very careful about where they threw away, where they threw away waste food. And they were extremely careful with their resources in ancient India. There's this, I think, when they were donated cloth for robes, it started off as robes, and then when it was too old and worn out for robes, then they used it as bedding. They put it underneath them and slept on it. And then when it was too old and worn out for that, then they used it as on the floor as mats. And then when it was too old and ragged for that, then they just used it as rags to feed it. So that is the extent that they went to in monastic institutions. And the Buddha made rules for his followers to protect animals and plants. So it was even an offense to cut or kill a plant. If you cut or killed a plant, you had to confess it for the monthly confession. Okay, this was for the monks. So he revered the whole of life, and he asked his followers to revere the whole of life. And then, as I say, particularly for the monks and nuns, there were quite strict rules about how to do that, how to remain non-violent. So for us, connecting with the natural world can be grounding. Apart from anything else, apart from kind of giving, it can give us nourishment, and it can give us a sense of grounding, especially in the age of devices and screens. Left to our own devices, we will spend far too much time on them than is healthy for, well, I will anyway, far too much time on it that's really healthy for my eyes and for my neck and my general sense of well-being. So we can become more sensitive to the natural cycles. We can appreciate natural beauty. I'm just going to read a little poem here from the Buddhist time, or from shortly after the Buddhist time. This is probably the first nature poem that we ever have in world literature. Strung with garlands of flowering vines, this patch of earth delights the mind. The lovely calls of elephants sounds. These rocky crags do please me so. The shimmering hue of darkening clouds, cool waters in pure streams flowing, enveloped by Indra's ladylights. These rocky crags do please me so. Like the lofty peaks of looming clouds, like the most refined of palaces, the lovely calls of tuskers sound. These rocky crags do please me so. The lovely ground is rained upon. The hills are full of holy seers, resounding with the cry of peacocks. These rocky crags do please me so. And so on. So an evocation of the mountains and the beauty of the mountains. So sensing the earth and the earth element can give us grounding. We can sense that earth element internally in our own bodies and externally around us and in the earth around us. We depend on the natural world for our survival, not the other way around. So we're part of the earth is part of us. Ancient people of both East and West saw physical form as having four qualities: earth, air, fire, and water. In Buddhist thought, these were not regarded as substances so much as tendencies or qualities. And earth represents the quality of solidity. Water represents the quality of fluidity. Air, the quality of lightness and expansiveness. And fire, the quality of cold and heat and radiation. So we're in a constant exchange with these different elements. In fact, this is an insight practice, even to reflect in this way. It's a Buddhist insight practice, to reflect that we're made up of these different elements: the earth element, the water element, the air element, the fire element. We're in a constant exchange through our bodies with these elements. Take breathing, for example, the air element. When it stops, we stop. That's how close we are to the air. When our breathing stops, unless we're on an iron lung or something giving us the kiss of life, we will stop. Our heart will stop very shortly. And how long can we survive without the water element? Not that long, maybe a few days. Depends on the temperature. So yes, we're in a constant exchange with these elements. It's not that we're separate from these elements. We are made up of these elements. And we'll be giving them back at some point. They're just borrowed. We're just borrowing them for the time being. And we take good care of, hopefully we take good care of them. However, at some point, you know, at the end of our life, we'll really give them back. So what comes up for you when you do this? So maybe just take a minute of reflection, silent reflection, and then we'll look at a few people. Touching the earth. So what comes up for you? Reflecting in this way, that we're in a constant experiment with the elements.
That's sort of impermanence, really. How everything's in a constant state of flux, really.
Yeah. So from one point of view, everything's impermanent, and from another point of view, everything's just in flow. Everything's just flowing. There's this constant change, constant process, constant flow. And we see some things arising, and then receding, and other things arising and receding constantly. What do you think?
Like a sensation of melting into everythingness. What happens to me when I reflect on that?
A kind of melting.
So into the everythingness of everything. Very connected to the flow, idea of flow as well.
Yeah, it's kind of somehow melting into, as you were saying, the everythingness. For me, there's a great sense of relief actually in that kind of sense of connection, that implicit gut sense of connection. It's like, oh, where did that go? So where did I lose that? Well, probably as a child, and it's been a tough process to try and regain that sense of sort of gut connection, implicit sense of connection. Okay. Yeah,
And continuing on from the relief side of it, I sort of feel relief that I don't have to protect like this idea of who I am so strongly. I think that kind of loosening around the self, I guess, and that kind of not being, I'm not in control of that, so I shouldn't even try. Just let it be.
Yeah. So online people, you may not have heard that because of the silence. As we were saying, there's a sense of relief of not having to kind of try and protect a sense of self. And you can just kind of loosen that sense of tight sense of self. Yeah. And this is the last bit there.
I just you don't have to put the effort in.
Yeah. That's it. You don't need to put that effort you put into protecting the sense of self, the tight sense of self. Can we online? There's a reassurance somehow. I do not continue, and yet the parts of which I'm a temporary creation do. Not sure why that should be reassuring, but it is. Connection, as you say. Right, that's it. Okay, so there's something about touching the earth, and it's well worth making this a practice. It's well worth making a practice of this because it's a kind of antidote to screens and more screens and devices, and you know that we can get very kind of carried away with that and kind of lose a sense of connection with ourselves. So now I want to talk briefly about the three bases of environmental ethics, the Buddhist environmental ethics. So we can summarize the Buddhist ethical bases of environmental awareness as one, rational self-interest. Rational self-interest. We don't want to foul our own nest, and we want to preserve the possibility of enlightenment. Two, a sense of solidarity with, or even identification with the natural world, as we can talk about there. And finally, number three, a spontaneous outpouring of compassionate action for the benefit of all. A spontaneous outpouring of compassionate action for the benefit of all. So I'll say a little bit about each one of those. So rational self-interest. It's in our interest to protect the earth. It's in our interest right now, and also for future generations. We have children or we have relatives, it's in our interest. Or even if we just care about the just species, any species. We don't want to foul our own nest. If we foul our own nest, we won't be able to live in it. And particularly for Buddhists, we value enlightenment, the possibility of awakening. So we want to preserve the possibility of awakening now and in the future for future generations. And one way of preserving that possibility is by making sure that people still can breathe. And people there's still clean air, clean water, and farmable land and so forth. Yeah? If there isn't, it'll be very difficult for people in the future to live. So we want to preserve the possibility of enlightenment for this and future generations. So this is rational self-interest and our interest in enlightenment. Second one, a sense of solidarity with the natural world. Well, we could just, without overthinking, we can just feel a sense of solidarity, a sense of connection with the actual natural world that will lead us, that will motivate us to care for it. You know, we just kind of feel sort of empathy for whales, or dolphins, or insects, or bees, or birds, or whatever it is, that we kind of have a feeling for. We can feel that. And out of that sense of solidarity, that sense of empathy, we can care for the natural world, we can protect the natural world. And thirdly, a spontaneous outpouring of compassion. A spontaneous outpouring of compassionate action for the benefit of all. So again, this is just a kind of spontaneous action. It's like if we see suffering, we do something to alleviate it. We want to alleviate it, we want to reduce it, and we try and find a way to do it. Just like the Buddha, the clump of grass Buddha, he sees there's a way that he can contribute, he can protect the tree, so he does it. He transforms himself into a chameleon and changes the colour of the tree, and that has a desired effect. So we can just act in that kind of way, spontaneously. We don't even need to think about it, we can just act spontaneously. Like if we see somebody putting their hand into a fire, we just grab the hand and pull it out. We don't think about it. If we're close enough, we do something to try to stop that suffering, to reduce that suffering. So, rational self-interest, sense of solidarity, and spontaneous outpouring of compassion. We're going to go into breakout rooms now. Yasmin? So, breakout rooms in threes. Which of these three ethical bases speaks to you most? Maybe they all do, but I'd like you just kind of review these three bases. Which of these speaks to you? In groups of three, please. And you'll have 5 minutes in total to do this in groups of three. Yeah, so automatically roll groups of three, and in the room, groups of three, and then we'll compare next.
If you give me a sec, I'll just pop you in a room. Let's go to room 3.
equality people, Mediterranean people? Which one I want to speak to you?
Can you just remind us what the
Yes, indeed. Okay. Part of this exercise is to make sure we remember. So they are rational self-interest, so that is not fouling our own nest and preserving the possibility of enlightenment. Then we've got a sense of solidarity, in our bodies, a sense of solidarity with other species in the natural world. And then we've got just a spontaneous outpouring of compassionate activity. Which of these speaks more? After this, you'll be able to memorize those and you'll be able to repeat those and talk about the knowledge of them to your friend. So, which speaks to you? Yes.
I think for me, it's the compassion one because it's the act of compassion. Like if you see someone suffering, an animal or a plant, you want to take action to help them. Like you can feel solidarity, but to actually take that action to ease their suffering, I think that is the most important.
Yeah. So if you see suffering, there's a natural impulse to try to relieve that suffering. To act, to do that. Yeah. We all have that impulse. So, it's an impulse, and it's also an aspect of enlightenment. That impulse, the compassionate aspect of enlightenment. We're that close.
We spent a lot of time talking about solidarity with beetles and daddy long
solidarity with beetles.
Not just beetles, but that was just an example. Daddy long and kittens. But yeah, so there's a sense of a resonance, I suppose, with the other creatures. It's not us and them. It's very much we're letting them down, really, and so we feel a sense of solidarity. Whether that's, I'm not sure whether that's the foremost, but that's the one we ended up spending the most time talking about.
So what I'm hearing though is we just sense life out there in other beings. We sense that they're beings like us. We sense their kind of beingness, their kind of consciousness, or whatever it is, and we feel something about that. We feel some response, some resonance with it. We feel that there's something valuable about life, just as life. It doesn't need to do anything. But just the fact that it's alive, and we're alive, that there's a resonance. It's very powerful.
I think it's also the fact that more and more they're living in our world. And the effect that we're having on them, and there's a certain innocence that comes with the animal world, I think. And, I'm moving house. I can't explain to my cats that I'm moving house. They're going to suffer. I can't explain that, and the world is changing. They don't know. They're just victims of that change.
Yeah, well, humans are encroaching on particularly wild animals' territory through farming, through cities, the spread of cities, and so on and so forth. And that's apparently that's one of the reasons why more diseases are coming from the animal world, being transmitted, being passed from wild animals to humans. It's because we're in their space. We're taking more of their space. There's more of a chance for that crossover.
I was just thinking that I'm a parent now, two youngish kids, and so actually one thing that's become clear for me is as much as I like daddy long legs and beetles and cats and stuff, having kids and wondering about their future feels much more immediate for me. And I know that that's the same for a lot of other parents and young kids. And it just feels much more immediate, the concern of what they're going to inherit from the mess that we're kind of leaving. So that gives me a particular kind of anxiety and imperative to try and do something. As much as not to dismiss the other species and stuff, still closer with your own kids.
Yeah, so online people, if you didn't pick that up, it's like Well, if you have kids, that's a very powerful motivation to not to foul your own nest, because it's going to be their nest at some point. They're not going to get a new one. It's not going to suddenly transform into a new nest. The nest is this nest, and if we foul it, it's going to be fouled for the future generation.
Well, hopefully I am going to kick them out of my nest at some point. They're going to find their own nest. Why not do one?
We talk about the wider nest. I fully understand you might want to do nest back. Anybody else? Somebody online, let's have a look. No, okay, no one's in the chat. Okay, so is there anybody else who'd like to comment on this? Which one speaks to you?
I just said I was touched by the sort of preserving the world for the sake of enlightenment. You know, I hadn't really thought about that. But I've always struck by the line, you know, in the Sevenfold Puja about the Buddhas, may they remain here so that life does not grow dark, and seem to sort of tie in with that.
Yeah. It's a very important, I mean, if you value enlightenment, we also, if we value enlightenment, we also value the conditions for enlightenment, upon which enlightenment can take place. And at the moment, that's, you know, humans and other species are animals. Cool. All right, so I said I would say something briefly about how and why I wrote this book, and then we'll have a short break, and then we'll come back for a meditation. We'll do a guided reflection on working with overwhelm, fear, despair, depression, and anxiety. So how and why I wrote this book. In 2019, I finally woke up to the urgency of the situation. It had been on my mind for quite a while, but I finally kind of realized that actually the fire alarm was ringing. It may seem very late for some of you, but that's how it is. In terms of the burning house, I heard the fire alarm and realized that I needed to alert other people, Buddhists especially, but everybody, that our house is on fire. Initially, drawing on my experience as a nonviolent communication trainer, I supported Extinction Rebellion rebels with de-escalation training. So that was my contribution in 2019 to Rebellion in 2019. And you'll find some humorous and possibly touching stories in the book. I'll see if I can find one. Then I realized that I needed to get more informed about the topic. So I started writing about what I was finding out for a Buddhist audience. And the result was this book, The Burning House, the Buddhist Response to the Climate and Ecological Emergency. So drawing on the richness of the Buddhist tradition and my experience as an MC trainer doing de-escalation, I suggest practical ways to make a difference. Personal stories, examples, guided reflections at the end of each chapter. And I explore how to work with doubt, overwhelm, grief and anger, and to engage with the science of climate debates, free yourself to align with life, and to act with courage, humour and generosity. Let's see if I can find a little story to illustrate. In 2019, working with Extinction Rebellion, I coordinated non-violence and de-escalation training across all 9 London sites of the October Rebellion. By Thursday of the first week, the centre of activities had moved to Trafalgar Square. There were dozens of tents crowded onto the central island, and hundreds of rebels blocking the traffic on the south side. Coming onto the square, and looking up at Nelson's column, I saw that the plinth was skirted with vivid red flames. Later that morning, I facilitated an intro session for new rebels in the non-violence and de-escalation tent. Straight afterwards, they were keen to try out their new skills, so I took them out onto the road on the south side. We immediately came across a tense situation. A line of police officers were shouting, "Move back onto the square," so the rebels were on the road, on the street, and the police wanted them back onto the pavement, into the square. And the police were shouting this to 50 to 100 rebels who were standing in the road. as they shouted to the rebels, they pushed them against a larger crowd of rebels that was sitting on the pavement. So they're pushing a standing group of people against a sitting group of people. I was very concerned for the safety of those sitting down. The way things were going, the standing rebels could easily topple onto them. And it was a bit more complex than that because the standing rebels, most of them couldn't see that people close near them were sitting down. All they could see was standing. Okay, most of them. Surrounded by these new recruits from our non-violence and de-escalation session, I started singing. My intention was to distract the rebels' attention from the police and to de-escalate. I sang, "People are going to rise like water, going to turn this system around." In the voice of my great-granddaughter, "Climate justice now." And the people who were with me, beside me, started singing as well. They joined in with me. But none of the crowd in front of us started singing. Their attention was firmly on resisting the police. And the attention of the police was firmly on pushing them off the road. Okay, so they were kind of locked into each other, into this kind of pushing struggle. I felt frustrated and helpless. How to break this deadlock? Then I heard a voice from the other side of the crowd, and looking over, I could tell from the white vest that the person was wearing that was one of the non-violence and de-escalation team, and he got hold of a megaphone, one of my colleagues. In measured tones, he said, "I invite you to take a breath and another. Feel your feet, the ground underneath your feet, your connection with the earth." And by now, from the voice and his glasses, I could identify him as one of my colleagues, Ben Yeager. He continued, "Take a moment to remember why you're here, what your intention is." And as Ben was talking, I picked my way around the outside of the crowd until I was beside him, because I knew that what he was doing was really, really hard, really, really tough for him to do. So I knew he needed support. So I went around and got beside him. After a long pause, he said to the crowd with his megaphone, "Reach out and touch the person next to you." This was pre-COVID. "Reach out and touch the person next to you." And I could feel in my stomach the tension of the crowd relaxing as he said that. You know, it's just that act of reaching out and touching somebody next to you. And I touched Ben on the arm and I whispered to him, "I've got something for a few minutes after you're done, when you're done." And he looked at me with total relief and immediately handed me the megaphone. And as I took it, I remember thinking, I'm not ready for this. However, the megaphone was already in my hand. So I took a deep breath, and I said to the crowd, "Now turn to your neighbor again and tell them something that you're grateful for being alive on this earth. What are you grateful for being alive on this earth?" Of course. I said, "Be specific. If you love the smell of coffee in the morning, say that." So the crowd, they turned to each other and started having this conversation about what they're grateful for, being alive on the earth. And Ben turned to me and he said, "That's beautiful," he said, like just incredulous. And then he said emphatically, "Now just stay here and hold that space. Hold the space for a while." So I nodded and he walked away. So I just stood there with the megaphone in my hand now, surrounded by a couple of the people who followed me from the outside of the crowd. And within a minute, the crowd was buzzing with relaxed conversation. And I looked over at the police and I noticed they'd stopped pushing. It struck me that once the rebels had relaxed and stopped resisting, the police had nothing to push against. So there's some weird thing happened in that moment, in those minutes, where everything just went and relaxed. The police had nothing to push against. They simply couldn't carry on pushing. And then a quiet kind of burbly flute and guitar duo started up somewhere over here on the left, signaling a further relaxation in the crowd. And a man next to me in his mid-20s asked me what I was grateful for, being alive on this earth. And I replied, without thinking, I'm grateful for the love of my partner, Gesine, and feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin. And then I started crying. We must have chatted, him and I, we must have chatted for about 20 minutes. Now it felt like a sociable Sunday afternoon. And finally, after about 20 minutes, a samba band came in, changing the mood of the crowd again. And I looked at the people around me, we looked at each other, our job was done, so we left the crowd too. Well, that's an example of de-escalation in action with large crowds. So we'll pause for a tea break in a moment. So what comes up for you when you hear a story about de-escalation? How to maintain non-violence in large crowds? And again, online people, if you want to write in the chat.
I think it's interesting how the mood of a large group of people can be changed by a relatively small but correct action at the right time, right place, the right word. And maybe that says something. There's a larger story there about mood. Yeah,
It's a large presence of mind to do what Ben did, just to kind of start out. You know? It's a large presence of mind because almost certainly you're going to be adrenalized. You're going to be either fearful or angry or something to the point where you can't really think straight, actually. You know, almost certainly if you're in that kind of situation. It takes a lot of presence of mind to stay grounded and to remember what the choices you've got, how you might, you know, what you might do.
I think what resonates for me is like meeting the opposition with not with the same force. Like the police are coming at you with anger and a lot of force, but you have to respond with, you know, kindness and love instead of that same anger force, because then they'll be like destabilized and they won't know what to do. But if you reply with the same like hate and violence, then that's just going to keep, you know, that's just going to grow. But
yeah, then they know what to do. They know, they've got that down. They've got that program. They know what to do if they're met with force, if they're met with violence, verbal or physical. And they don't quite know what to do. They're met with non-violence.
I think that's the big difference between like right-wing and left-wing protests, because like a lot of exile, it's always non-violence, and the other police don't know what to do.
Reminds me of Aikido.
Yeah, something a bit magical there, isn't it?
Yeah. With Aikido, you know, it's yeah, I mean it's a martial art, so it's kind of based in combat. And it's about meeting the energy of the other person where it is, but not resisting it. It's like taking that energy, turning it into something which becomes like a dance. It's almost a dance to movement of energy, but you have to kind of so it's not backing down. It's a kind of creative engagement. So the first thing you do is you meet and then see where the energy wants to go. Yeah, the creativity of it, the beauty of it.
Yeah, there's some echo there in martial arts about how actually meeting that energy but not resisting it is then redirecting it is more.
Yeah,
I have a sense to go with the energy.
Yeah,
This is the way I.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you
go with the energy, and then you give a new direction.
Yeah, you give them. But you know, the art comes out of the staying grounded. So what you were talking about earlier, or what Ben's think about coming down to the groundedness. You can only do that Aikido thing from a sense of groundedness.
Yeah, you need to be really grounded in order to meet the energy and go with it, and also potentially. Okay. Anybody online? Meet and see where the energy wants to go. Useful. So it says, I'm grateful for this Sangha, I'm grateful for the work of Extinction Rebellion, the power of non-violent direct action. I would find speaking in that crowd so difficult, struck by the bravery. Yeah. So I tell you what I do, is I try to remember my breathing, and I also try to count off, this is why I use my fingers here. I try to remember the choices I've got, and I hold them here in my hand like this. So, and I could say this, or I could do this, or I could do this, and I just keep going. And that's really how I remember stuff in that kind of situation. I remember I've got 5 fingers. There's something, each one means something. You know? Okay. All right, so let's have a break for 5 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll do guided reflection, nurturing compassion towards the environment. 5-minute break. We're back here maybe at 9:05. So welcome back. So we're going to do a guided reflection, nurturing compassion towards the environment. However, before that, we'll just do a bit of housekeeping. So Tim, could you put in the chat the links to the Tree Ratna Earth Sangha website? So it's a group of people I've been involved with over the last few months, Tree Ratna Earth Sangha, and there is a website. And also we're running a conference this weekend, an online conference with various speakers, including David Loy, who wrote a book called Ikadama, and Bhikkhu Analio, who presented a course, an online course called Mindfully Facing Climate Change. So they're joining us, and various Tree Ratna speakers as well, including myself. So that's a conference this weekend, starting Friday evening, going through to Sunday afternoon. And then, of course, there's my book, which you can buy from the Windhorse Publications website, or you can buy, if you want a signed copy, I've brought some with me, and I'll sit outside and sign those. And finally, I'm running an 8-week version of this. I'm doing 3 weeks here, but I'm running an 8-week version of this course online on the Buddhist Centre online, starting 16th of October for Tree Ratna wide sort of audience. So if you want 8 weeks of this, if this has whetted your appetite and you want to kind of go through the whole 8-week course, then go to the Buddhist Centre online, and I think there's a link coming in the chat for that. And hopefully those links will go in the newsletter or be accessible somewhere.
Yeah, we can make sure they are. Yeah.
Okay, you can make sure they are.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Could I also just add?
Yeah.
Okay. So we also have an eco crisis practice group that runs here at the centre. Details of that are on the website.
Yeah, yeah. Eco crisis group met on Sunday, meeting again 10th of October. Okay, usually Sunday afternoons, Friday 5:30 to 7.
Could you send me those those ones you just announced?
Okay, Tim, could you forward them to? We'll sort it out somehow. Yeah, we'll get it sorted. All right, so we're going to have a meditation, then we're going to do transference of merits, and that'll be the end, folks, apart from book signing if you want a book. So if you want to get comfortable to sit for perhaps around 15 minutes now. So take a moment to settle into your posture, whether sitting or lying down. Let the mind rest in the body, as the body rests on the cushion, the chair, or the floor. Come into your heart. And as you're in your heart, bring to mind a specific instance of your suffering in relation to the climate and ecological emergency. It might be a sense of sadness or grief, or some other more direct impact. Hold yourself in loving kindness with an awareness of this suffering. Sense what you're feeling right now. Is your heart heavy or contracted? And underneath this, what are you longing for? What is your heart's deepest wish? Are you longing for protection for all beings, including future generations? Are you longing for peace of mind, freedom, understanding, protection, or compassion itself? This is self-compassion. When you're ready, bring to mind a friend that you feel warmly towards. Hold them in your heart with loving kindness. Now bring to mind their suffering. As you're doing this, focus on the person rather than the specific suffering. What's important to them? What do they need to live a full and satisfying life? What would help them to thrive and flourish? This is compassion towards a good friend. When you're ready, call to mind a being or beings who are suffering as a result of the climate and ecological emergency. This could be a person or beings that you know, or ones that you've heard about. You don't have to choose a being or beings who are suffering in an extreme way. The object of this guided reflection is to nurture compassion, loving kindness with an awareness of suffering. If you find yourself feeling despondent, try returning to self-compassion. Connecting with what you need to thrive, with an awareness of suffering. Remember that we're not trying to develop compassion directly. Let go of your assumptions about what compassion is. The basic emotion is loving kindness, or metta. Try to develop loving kindness towards this being or beings with an awareness of their particular suffering. Bear in mind that there are other aspects of their experience of life. Focus on the being or beings as they go about their lives, rather than specifically on their suffering. What do they need? Freedom to enjoy their lives? Clean air? Space to roam? What would support them to grow and thrive? And if you could take a step to alleviate this suffering, what would it be? Vividly imagine yourself taking this step. What does it look like, sound like, feel like to be taking this step? And when you're ready, bringing to mind someone or beings that you have difficulties with, perhaps even someone that you're in conflict with, someone you avoid, someone whose choices you see as contributing to the current climate and ecological emergency. Now bring to mind their suffering. As you do this, focus on the person rather than the specific suffering. And if you notice that you're experiencing Schadenfreude or satisfaction at their suffering, you could go back to self-compassion or any earlier stage of the practice. If you can hold them with loving kindness, with an awareness of their suffering, you could ask yourself, what's important to them? What do they need to live a full and satisfying life? What would help them to thrive and flourish? When you're ready, bring to mind all of these people or beings together in your imagination. Yourself, your close friend, the suffering beings, the person you struggle with. Hold all of you with loving kindness, equally for each one, with an awareness of their suffering. And finally, radiate this equality of loving kindness with an awareness of suffering throughout the entire universe. May all beings be happy and secure with an awareness of suffering. May all beings be happy at heart with an awareness of their suffering. Making this wish for beings of all kinds without exception. Transference of merit and self-surrender. in call and response. May the merit gained
May the merit gained
in my acting thus
in my acting thus
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences,
My personality throughout my existences,
my possessions,
my possessions,
and my merit in all three ways,
and my merits in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself,
I give up without regard to myself,
for the benefit of all beings.
for the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements
Just as the earth and other elements
are serviceable in many ways
are serviceable in many ways
to the infinite number of beings
to the infinite number of beings
inhabiting limitless space,
inhabiting limitless space,
so may I become
so may I become
that which maintains all beings,
that which maintains all beings,
situated throughout space,
situated throughout space,
so long as all have not attained
so long as all have not attained
to peace.
to peace.